Hello, 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 everyone. We are here with episode 3 of the Pagan Viewpoint. It's July 6th, 2021. So happy New Year. Um,
Yes, Happy New Year.
yeah, I am Caleb Van Forn, and that is the lovely Miss Alyssa Ravenwood, um,
Hi, everyone.
your host for this amazing show, um, who, which is still coming along. It's a lot of fun. Um, so this is our first episode of the new year. Um, we skipped last week just due to some issues going on both ends.
Oh, it's stress and chaos,
Yeah,
my friend.
yeah. So we decided to cancel last week's um, episode just because, like I said, just a few things going on. We wanted to make sure that we'd actually be able to deliver a quality show, and last week we would not have been able to. Um, like I said, still working out a few kinks, but we're back. So,
Yeah.
um, so then interest, I figure we'll start off. We have quite a few topics lined up for tonight, as well as even just other things I'd love to talk about outside of these topics. Um, so we have a lot to get through. We're supposed to only be around an hour, so we'll try to get through them judiciously. Um, so our first topic for the night, just in case anyone wasn't sure, which none of you are, is one that's really like personal to me right now, and I'm sure to a lot of people, and as well as a kind of list at this moment as well, which is just holiday grief and loneliness. We just passed the holidays, but I know from personal experience that the holidays can extend deep into January and even often February, and then all the other annual holidays. So, like Valentine's Day, um, President's Day.
Easter, all of the family holidays, you're expected to go and be around large groups of people.
Yes, exactly. And so, here's a good time to kind of bring this up. Um, and yeah, so this topic in particular was kind of brought on for me personally, and I'll actually be writing something on this, which will go up in the near future. I just haven't been able to bring myself to kind of write about it in detail yet. Which is Christmas Eve morning. I woke up to Wolfie, our dog, um, of many years, best thing I've ever known in the world, dead. He passed, and we found him on our floor in the morning when we woke up, which was pretty rough. And yet we still had to deal with the holidays. Like just 4 hours later, we left to go to a family Christmas celebration, which is a lot. Um, and so we wanted to bring up the just talking about holiday grief, loneliness, dealing with those emotions, both what it's like, bringing awareness to the issue, and then what skills do we actually use to kind of navigate those.
Yeah, and then right now I am dealing with loneliness of my own.
mm-hmm.
Not anyway having to do with holidays, except that because of New Year's, my husband decided he was going to go down to a big city to see if he could make extra money, and he has not been home since.
Yeah.
He is still down in Houston making money. And so that's been a little bit lonely for me because that leaves the stress of, the kids and everything else very squarely on my shoulders while he's gone.
Yeah.
Um, plus no cuddles. That sucks.
Yeah. And no cuddles can be pretty rough. Um,
But no, and so it can be really hard because whenever holidays start coming up for me, I don't know about you, but my family for the most part are working people. And so
mm-hmm.
they never really had holidays off. We always did it the day before or the weekend before, whenever was convenient. The
Mm-hmm.
holiday was whenever anyone was free. Um, Pretty much, and so it's just like it never seems to be quite so important.
Yeah.
Um, my family. It's just that those are the times that are usually highlighted for me by loneliness, by isolation. Not just because, my husband often goes away to work, but also because growing up, I had to go to family gatherings and I was not
Hmm.
very welcome.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that I understand deeply. Like, let's see, I grew up from, I come from a family of working class people, and like, although I also come from a family of farmers, um, and farming has no days off and yet every day off, um, at the same time. So,
Yeah.
um, it was very much those lines as well. And yeah, holidays have always kind of been whenever was convenient for the most people. And even then, sometimes not everyone could make it, especially as I started working. I had to work a lot of holidays. Um,
Yeah.
and like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like the holidays are a tough time.
They
And
are. I think we all just need to use that honestly as a reminder to be more gentle with one another.
yeah,
Kindness is usually not the wrong choice.
yeah, I've yet to find a time where kindness isn't the better choice. Um, like it's never the wrong one, and sometimes like cruelty, not even necessarily cruelty, but like anger, frustration, all those things can be the right choice as well. But I've never
Yeah.
found a time where kindness isn't the better choice.
Well,
And
see, and the thing is that there is no rule that says you cannot be angry and kind.
yep,
I get angry with my children all the time, like every day, multiple times a day. I have a 2-year old. The terrible twos are real,
yeah,
but that does not mean I am unkind. And so it's just, I think, a matter of trying not to invalidate other people's experience just because you're hoping for a perfect Hallmark occasion. Honestly, I kind of think that's a myth. It's just an excuse for a good meal and some fun with friends.
yeah,
And if you're not having fun, then what's the point?
yeah, exactly. And yeah, so yeah, kind of like it dovetails a little bit into kind of like where we wanted to go, kind of with this, which is a lot of it is a lot of people experience a lot of emotions around the holidays, and holiday grief and loneliness I think are the worst of it, especially in this year. Um, there are millions upon millions of families who are missing individuals this holiday, often for the first time, because of COVID, and
And
that's just in the
so many
U.S.
touch-starved individuals.
Yep.
Hot showers help for those of you who might be touch-starved,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Like, often many people who may have had spouses or significant others for years or even decades, um, they are now gone. Family members in the hospitals, lockdowns, travel restrictions, everything is leading to a lot
Yeah.
of disconnect and grief and loneliness, and oftentimes,
Hurt people, you guys.
yeah,
Don't think that just because they're hurting you means that you immediately need to lash out back at them. If the cat is hissing and clawing at you, that doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong.
yeah,
It just means,
exactly.
they're in that mode.
Yeah, and so Alyssa and I talked this week, and we talked about what are skills that both we use as well as skills that we can impart on other people to kind of help them navigate these issues. And one of the first ones that kind of pops up for us is especially as I've grown a lot as a person, and Alyssa's this way a lot as well, is don't let individuals force you to pretend you're okay. Like it's okay to be not be okay, and
Yeah.
um, especially when you're dealing with grief and loss and loneliness, you're gonna be feeling a lot of strong emotions, And one of the worst things you can do for yourself, like actually worst things you can do for yourself, is just shoving it down and pretending that like you don't actually feel that way for the sake of other people. Um,
Hmm.
just because your emotion, justified
Yeah.
emotions, make them feel uncomfortable. That's not your
Yeah,
fault.
it's like I've had anxiety attacks my whole life pretty much. And I was taught by several different members of my family that I was allowed to have the emotion. I was just never allowed to express it in a way that was inconvenient to literally anyone.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was pretty much, it was criminalized. I was penalized for
Hmm.
expressing my anxieties, which really just made it worse. They were using their authority at the time to try and force me to mask and pretend that I was okay when I was not,
Yeah.
because they didn't want to deal with the situation. Um, it was more convenient for them to just silence me. And so a lot of us had that we went through when we were growing up, and now that we're not, and now that we're consciously choosing the way that we behave, and examining our interpersonal, communications that you and I've been talking about, we need to realize we're not in that place anymore where if you don't say I'm sorry, you're going to get put in the corner. If you're not sorry, you don't have to say you're sorry. If you're angry or sad, you don't have to pretend that you're happy just because it's going to make um somebody else's situation possibly more comfortable. But then there's also a matter of sometimes when we are so busy trying to protect other people from being collateral damage in our situation, we're not cutting them enough credit,
Yep.
because most of us have at least one person in our life that loves us and wants us to be
Hmm.
happy and would be glad to sit there with you when you're unhappy and reminisce, or you
Yeah.
know come up with wild ideas for weird vacations you're
Yeah.
never going to take. I mean, who even knows? But
Yeah.
there's got someone out there who'd be willing to do that with
Yeah.
you. And while
Yeah.
that doesn't invalidate your experiences, it definitely cheers people up a lot faster.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And to be really frank and honest, like I've never met someone. Um, honestly, like I'm not sure even a person exists. To be frank, that doesn't have someone in their life who loves them. They might not realize it. They like
Yeah.
there were many times in my life where I felt like I didn't. In part just because of much of the invalidation and abuse I'd suffered for years. And
Hmm.
so I told myself a story. But looking back, like the people that would have helped me best definitely existed. And I,
Hmm.
and so if you critically examine your life, um, anyone out there, odds are there's definitely at least one person there who can
Hmm.
be there for you in these
Yeah.
moments. And that shifts into like the next part of this and kind of the next skill, right? Beyond just not pretending you're okay, is going even a step further, which is asking for what you need, um, which which like sounds really simple and straightforward and basic, but it's
So simple. And but I can tell from personal experience, asking for what you need is not easy.
yeah, like
It is
it can be
not.
incredibly difficult if you've been chronically invalidated, because often what you need might be space. You might need
Yeah.
to not be around people for a while, and
Hmm.
when you have obligations to be
Hmm.
places, sometimes like that can be really inconvenient for other people, and so you feel obligated to do so because you feel shame, on top of now your grief and your loneliness when you're already emotionally vulnerable. And so to avoid feeling that shame, you do it because you think
Yeah.
suffering through this thing that will make it worse for me is easier than asking for what I actually need in this moment. That would make my life and experience better, or asking for hugs, asking
Yeah,
for a
see,
talk.
those things are very, very different. And I do want to be clear for people out there, for our viewers out there. Um, pushing yourself into a situation that is going to be uncomfortable and is not actually going to benefit anyone really, or is only going to one-sided benefit someone else, those things are unhealthy.
Yeah.
But getting outside of your comfort zone and doing something that normally you would say no to, going on an
Mm-hmm.
adventure, going on a random trip, on those occasions,
Yes.
or when it comes to something that could spark a bit of, inspiration, or give an experience and a memory that you might,
Mm-hmm.
pass on to your children, or, nieces or nephew, what have you.
Yeah.
Just that neighbor kid that you talk to occasionally between
Mm-hmm.
bridge club meetings. I don't know. But
Yeah.
if that's the spice of life. So don't hold yourself back from that and hold
Mm-hmm.
yourself in the comfort zone under this lie of self-care.
Yeah.
Just make sure that if you're going to be investing the spoons to go on an adventure, that you trust yourself and the people on the adventure with you, and that you do that self-care that helps you to
Yeah.
maintain where you're
Yeah.
at.
Because we have to remember that um, sadness isn't depression, and depression isn't sadness. They're very different things, but the behaviors that extreme sadness induces mimic depression quite a lot.
Hmm.
So sadness is going to bring a lot of urges to isolate yourself,
Hmm.
to stay in bed, to not do anything, to avoid the world, and those
Hmm.
behaviors actually can be really healthy in a short amount. Like often, like even
Hmm.
going back to Wolfie's death, like yeah, we went on Christmas Eve because we had an obligation and his family and his Christmas all stuff. But then Christmas Day we had no obligations and we were probably gonna do stuff, but then Wolfie died, so we just stayed in bed all day and ate snacks and watched movies because
Yep.
that's what we needed that day. But then the very next day we had people over because we had because that is also what we needed. We needed to not be alone and isolated for long periods of time. That's only going to further enhance those emotions of sadness. And that's a
Mm.
big part of grief, I find, especially over the holidays, is that obligation can be way too much. But community and closeness are the
Yeah.
best things for you. And
Yeah.
so it's all about finding the balance between where is the environment healthy for me to be, where is the community good for me, and
Yeah.
where is that community actually going to take from me.
Yeah.
um, and that's the balance. And so a big part is like self-awareness. This goes even into deeper skills on emotion regulation, which we've talked about previously and we'll talk about a lot more in the future, which is a lot of self-awareness on what you actually need in the moment, both on what you're feeling, to what
Yeah.
intensity you're actually feeling it, because
Mm.
it comes in waves. Like
Yeah.
as long as you're not actually as long as your behaviors aren't feeding into the emotions, um,
Mm.
a strong wave of emotion lasts about 20 minutes on the max end.
Yeah.
Like 5 to 10 minutes is how long you're going to experience a wave of emotion. And as long as you're, like I said, as long as you're not engaging behaviors that are going to keep that emotion up and around,
Yeah.
a lot of which, trust me, I've engaged in myself, but a lot of them are self-harming behaviors. So any addiction or addictive behavior or self-harm behavior, or um, even behaviors such as avoidance. A lot of times if you just continually avoid things and avoid the emotion, it's actually just going to keep pushing back. Emotions are much like a beach ball, and
Yeah.
and so if you let them sit on top of the water and just ride the wave, they'll ebb and flow. But if you try to suppress them, you're pushing a beach ball down, and the harder you suppress, the more they push back. And you might be able to hold off for hours, days, months, years even. But eventually that beach ball is going to come out of the water, and the longer you push them down, the bigger the explosion is going to be.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and so just allowing yourself to ride the waves of those emotions.
Mm.
Like there were times where I would be completely fine one second, and then I would just be crying and bawling the
Yeah.
next. But just but don't try to, but like, not trying to suppress that, is what allowed me to then move past it faster, to
Mm-hmm.
experience that loss and that sadness and that grief and cry and everything in that moment. And then 10 minutes later, I might be like making a joke about the dog who I loved so much and about what he did and be totally fine and laughing.
Yeah.
Like, riding the waves of your emotions is one of the single largest skills that helps with loneliness and grief, acknowledging them and riding their waves. Because they're not there
Mm.
constantly. No emotion is there 100% of the time.
No, they're definitely not. And um I mean, I love the way you're explaining it. I've had it explained to me that way before. Is very easy way to understand it because who hasn't tried to hold a ball underneath the water at some point?
Yeah.
Um, but it's really important to distinguish what you're talking about from the love and light, toxic positivity spiritualist movement, because
Yes.
you know I have seen I have seen quite often in the spiritual community, they try to convince you to completely um, just disregard all of your own feelings and concentrate only on the positive.
Yeah. There
Um,
are no positive and
that
negative
invalidates your
emotions.
feelings. Well, that invalidates your feelings, your emotions, and your experiences as
Yeah.
much as anybody else doing it to you. So,
Exactly.
acknowledging it and allowing yourself to experience it and then letting it go once you have experienced all that there is to learn or experience from that emotion in that situation,
Yeah.
that actually is a much healthier way to do it.
Exactly. There is no emotion that's a negative one. Emotions
Mm,
just are. They're neutral. They're not positive or negative. There's no judgment to be placed on emotions.
hmm
Emotions serve a purpose.
right.
They serve a person either to validate you, to communicate something to you, or to promote action. Right? Those are the three purposes of emotion. Scientifically, like that's what emotion is there to do. It's either there to validate you, to communicate something to you, or to move you to action.
hmm
Um, and like there's no positive or negative to it. If you're feeling sad, you've experienced, and especially over a loss, that sadness is validating your experience.
Yeah.
Like
And
that's what it's
it's like
doing to you.
I've noticed a lot of people get into emotional trees where it's like they feel the anger and then they suppress the anger. They feel guilt for feeling the anger because someone told them they weren't supposed
Yep.
to. And then they're suffering twice for one emotion when they shouldn't
Yeah.
have been suffering in the first place for the emotion.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It definitely, and that's something we can probably get into a lot. I can actually do lessons on it. Um, there's something called the model of emotion, right?
Hmm
It's actually it's a whole chart. It can fill out a lot of things. It's really cool and important. But it helps you kind of like better be able to describe your emotion and then also start to go into the emotions that trigger after the fire afterwards and what might have
hmm
led to those emotions and behaviors and actions, and it's a lot of fun. I can do a lot of education on that. And it's really, really
Yeah.
helpful. Um,
Understanding yourself is always helpful, and I don't feel like any of the children of the 90s or 2000s were ever really given those skills.
Gosh, remember chicken soup? Chicken soup for the soul. Chicken soup for
Chickens
the
for the
teenager
soul.
soul. Chicken soup.
I I liked those. I did. Those were just lovely.
They were, but to me, I'm just like, oh god, these skills are not helpful to me in any way. Not at all.
No.
Great emotion suppression. That's awesome.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's a lot more that we can talk about here, and I'll talk about more in my forthcoming essay. Um, and also, we'll talk about it more on the show. But we've even gone a little bit over time on this topic. um, but it's a really important one to talk about. And if you have any questions around dealing with holiday grief or just a story that you'd like to share to a willing ear who's willing to listen to it and validate your experience, please message us on any of our social platforms or feel free to send us an email at paganviewpoint@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear your stories. It'd be really, really great. But
Mhm.
in that vein, we are going to take a short break, so I can get something to drink quickly, and
Yes.
we will be right back with our next topic, and look forward to seeing you all then. Hello, we're back with the pagan viewpoint. Thank you so much for hanging around, everyone. Great that you're still here, if anyone is.
They'll be here eventually.
Yeah, they'll get here and then they'll come back and watch all these episodes, which will be a lot of fun.
They shall meander in.
Yeah. But we are back for our second topic of the night, which is one that we've had on the burner, at least our bonus topics list, for a while now. And so we decided to bring it up and just talk about it. Scheduled, I should say. And so that is it's paganism and parenting. So the
Yes.
show is the pagan viewpoint, and we spend a lot of time talking about just kind of things generally. But we want
Right.
to talk about things specific to paganism, and
Mm.
and as we've kind of noted before, I am myself not a pagan, um, but I really appreciate the struggles that would come along with parenting while being a pagan, and many of the skills
Yes.
needed to do so. And I've done a decent
It
amount of
can
looking at those
be
skills myself.
it can be extremely difficult, I'm not gonna lie. But usually the difficultness has nothing to do with the parenting, the child, or you. It
Mm-hmm.
has to do with other people inserting their opinions into the way that you parent, much as it is the problem with almost any issue in parenting that the general populace encounters. Mom shaming is a very real thing. But when you are in a country, or at least a part of a country that is not in any way receptive to paganism, it does become kind of tricky. Because from their early childhood, I've taught them little rhymes and stuff to keep them safe, and I've taught them little things that they can put together and use. Mommy has oils and crystals and
Hmm.
herbs and spices and everything else all around. There are days my daughter comes up to me and says, "Mommy, I just feel icky. Can you smoke cleanse me?" And I mean, there you go. So there's
Yeah.
a tremendous amount of tools available to anyone who wants to take care of anyone, really. But
Yeah.
especially in the ways of raising children, that allow them, a sense of empowerment and a sense of safety and assuredness in their own skills.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but I've had to very carefully instruct my children that we don't call them spells in mixed company. We don't talk about witchcraft as far as
hmm,
anyone's concerned. We don't talk about the God we worship or church or if we believe in God at all, because that's nobody's business but our own.
yeah.
And that is because we are in a very conservative Southern Baptist state.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
and
don't
that's
trust these people when it comes to the safety of my two little witchlings.
yeah.
Just
Well, and
no.
that's kind of exactly it, right? Like it deals into like with paganism specifically, as we'll talk about, but it deals with a lot of different belief systems that are outside the norm. And so like it's how do you communicate um,
Hmm.
those beliefs, right, to your children, like in a society that shuns that culture, right? Like
Yeah.
how do we communicate things to children that society writ large just like not only like just doesn't share belief in, but like actively shuns, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of belief systems that society at large shuns,
Oh, yeah.
and in more than one country, right? We're talking specifically in the U.S., which is a very Judeo-Christian based
That's
area,
the
but
one we understand the most, but we see it in other countries, most definitely.
yeah, like how do you communicate a non-Muslim belief in the midst of Saudi Arabia, right?
Yeah, that's
Like
actually a death penalty.
exactly right. Like how do you communicate those beliefs to your children?
That
Um,
witchcraft is punishable by death in Saudi Arabia.
yeah,
I actually looked it up.
yeah. Um, and then or in many other countries, like many places around the world, there are a lot of different cultures at place that you know that don't, like, even outside of paganism itself, right there, if you just hold those beliefs and share them, like
Hmm.
they like can be punishable by just just shunning in society, but then also in many places even death, right?
Hmm.
Just believing in sexual identity and
Yeah.
anything related to sexual preference and all that stuff can be a death sentence in many countries,
Oh, yeah,
or just outright
definitely.
shunned in much of the world. And
I've
so,
never understood it happen though.
yeah, and so it's how do you communicate those things to children, right, and keep the child
Well,
safe
I mean,
and yourself safe.
that's the struggle that I think every parent holds to. But I think that when it comes to me, I have tried to go with the mode of thinking of life's not fair, but that doesn't mean we have to be. Um, and so I think that my children do understand that there are going to be people in this world that they don't believe what you believe, and they're not going to
Hmm.
talk on your level, and they're not going to understand what you're talking about. You're simply not going to get on with them.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean anything is wrong on either side. It just means that you are two very unmixy things. There are plenty of people on this planet, and you'll find a group of your own somewhere. Don't try and force others to see things your way when they were never meant to.
Hmm. Yeah,
And that's very difficult for others to understand, but seeing as my children grew up with that, so that's normal to them. As far as they're concerned, if you say you're a pink and purple polka dotted elephant, they're not going to argue with you because it's not their business to define for you who you are.
yeah,
That's a you problem, not a them problem, because
yeah,
that's how I raised them. And to them, nothing else is really going to make sense.
yeah.
And that
Um,
makes it very difficult because we're in a very conservative state. So if they go about and they're doing, you know, what I have encouraged them to do, which is free thinking
yeah,
and, standing up for their belief systems, I also am terrified that I've then put my children into a position where they're going to start having a target on their back.
yeah. Well, in that starts to like break into this because don't get me wrong. In the U.S. in particular, there's a gigantic Christian persecution complex.
Mm,
Christians feel persecuted constantly, even though the vast majority in the country and dictate nearly everything to everyone else. But they feel persecuted. But
oh, I've heard it
there are
plenty of
many,
times.
yeah. But there are many Christians all over the world who are actually persecuted for their beliefs.
That
Um,
is true.
just as they're in the same way in which pagans in the U.S. are persecuted for their beliefs, in which
Oh yeah.
Muslims in China, like the Uyghur detention
Oh,
camps, for example, like which
mm,
gigantic human rights violations, and and when you live in a society that shuns who you are, right,
yeah.
that shuns everything about who you are, um, like how do you, what skills do we use to communicate um, our beliefs and traditions and assist children with being like proud of that culture and heritage,
Mm.
while also but without feeling the need to constantly go out and share it everywhere because it might put them at risk. Like that's a difficult tightrope to walk, and you don't want them to
Not
feel ashamed of who they are in
No,
public.
see, not really. I don't, not really, I don't think. I can see where you might think of it that way. But my people believe that if someone is meant to speak to you about spiritual things, if someone is meant to be on the level of discussing that with you, it would be made clear in that they would become friends with you and they would very easily find themselves getting close enough to you that they would then be able to have such private conversations with
Mm-hmm.
you. And
Yeah,
then once they found their answers, they may rapidly leave.
yeah,
But they might circle around again, and that's just the flow of
yeah,
life. It's the tide, ebbing and flowing.
yeah.
Um,
Well, part of
but
it, I have to ask, like, for example, like I grew up in a very both emotionally and experientially invalidating environment. Not
mm,
just like my home life, but what I mean is like the social life, the social structure of the
mm,
world around me, and like I held beliefs that I would never dare share with people around me
mm.
because they would actively like it might not even be like violence, but it might like physical violence, but
Oh yeah,
it can just be like constant emotional
might just be a sneer.
invalidation, right? And they might
It
not
could be
even
a
realize they're
sneer.
doing
It
it.
could be a snuffle. It could be. I mean, it could be a roll of the eyes, but that doesn't make it sting any less. Yeah.
Exactly, and being a child growing up in that environment where you hold a belief and then everyone around you, your entire social structure around you, actively mocks that
Hmm.
belief system. It
Hmm.
can bring out a lot of emotion in you,
Oh yeah.
and it can make you
It
like,
most certainly can. It's just that you have to be able to get your child to understand
mm-hmm,
that there's a difference between a characterization and the real deal. And
mm-hmm,
that the people who are meant to be in your close tribe, those people that are supposed to go from acquaintance to friend to, hopefully pseudo family, chosen family,
mm-hmm,
um, they, well, they may not know immediately, they will very quickly learn what is in it, what is and is not appropriate, just through experience of being around you. That's how they show you that they're ready to have those conversations. And that's, you know that takes a little bit of time and it takes a lot of effort, but the friends that you get out of that process are 100%.
Yeah.
You're going to get quality there, but that's also why we emphasize our tribe so much, our little team here, our
Yeah.
village, as we've been calling it.
So, so I have to ask,
Because
like,
even
what?
if all the rest of the world doesn't understand, we do.
Yeah. So, like, I have to ask them, like, how do we communicate those skills? Like, because that's a skill. Like actually being able to recognize that is how do we how do we communicate that in a way that the
You play
children can
pretend.
understand and
You
actually
play pretend. It's
mm-hmm.
that, so you play pretend.
Yeah. Yeah. So role play.
Dollies, video games, Barbie dolls, have stuffed animal having ridiculous arguments across the house where like I've had it where my husband was holding
Mm-hmm.
like a little kitty cat puppet and I had a little wolf puppet and we were across the house yelling at each other. And then like it was they came to an understanding and you know we depicted that to the children in a way that they could understand, and being able to play through that script,
Mm-hmm.
as it were, it gave them at least a semblance of an understanding of generally
Yeah.
where to go.
Yeah.
um
Role playing. Gigantic.
Role playing is a fantastic way to pass on skills. You can pass on multiple skills.
Mm-hmm.
Acting and drama can be fantastic, not just because it can teach you to act and be in a play and whatnot, but also
Mm-hmm.
because being able to put yourself into another character and get yourself into that mindset in order to be able to play that character convincingly can actually give you a tremendous amount of insight into the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. Exactly. Like that's amazing and it's great. Um, and so,
Everyone
like I said,
likes the
I'm not a either pagan or parent myself yet. Um, but I spent like a lot of time researching child psychology, and
mm,
children experience a lot of things in their lives, and those things trigger a lot of really big emotions and feelings in them, right? And so, especially with their peer groups, like if you're really believe in something or really proud of something, as a child specifically, you're much more likely to like, experience big emotion
oh
if that's
yeah.
invalidated. Either indignation, like frustration, all that stuff, or even just like perhaps sadness or fear or anything of that nature. And oftentimes it's amplified if you're a child.
Mm,
Um, so something that both around belief systems or just like in everyday life as a child. Like I've spent a lot of
mm,
time looking into like how do we assist children in dealing with those large emotions? Because in part, it like in belief systems like this, it'll keep them safe. Um,
mm.
but then in other scenarios, like it'll just help them navigate the world better. So
Yeah.
so
And
beyond role play, like what are some skills we use?
yeah, like when it comes to skills that we use, meditation is most definitely, starting them on that early is
Mm-hmm.
key. Teaching them how to be present inside of their body. It's extremely difficult to get a child to meditate, so you got to minimize that to about 5-minute intervals
Yeah.
and somehow make it not seem like timeout. It's a tricky balance, which is usually helped by the fact that mommy is participating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of it, though, it's just a matter of teaching them by example. All of these things. It's just showing them that it works. Because when it comes to paganism, we're not like a lot of special faiths out there. We're not a lot like a lot of religious beliefs out there. If you expect someone else, another, a different, autonomous to yourself human being, to believe what you say and do as you are suggesting that they do with their path and one of the most sacred things to them, their magic, then you had darn well better come with some results and proof of them before you approach them expecting them to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And so by teaching the children from a young age by experience and sort of priming them to be able to take control of that at any point in time, as they see fit, and regardless of the subject, be it spiritual or mundane. That actually, it helps quite a bit because at the end of the day, their path is their own. And as soon as they get up on their feet, as soon as they're walking on their own, watch them go because you're not going to be able to catch them. And the only time you're really going to be involved is when they come to you with questions specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so then after that, it's pretty much just self-explanatory. They come to you with questions and you answer them to the fullest extent of your ability or do what you need to do, um, in whatever the situation calls for. And that's pretty much universal when it comes to parenting. But when it comes to paganism, I just feel like if it doesn't involve keeping ourselves private and our beliefs private from the people around us who might take offense, for the most part, being a pagan and a parent just gives you a lot of extra tools to work with in order to help them to be able to do that. Because I mean, they start out they already basically understand emotional regulation. My 8-year-old can control her emotions better than most 40-year-olds I know. And that's just because I got them started early.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's, the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn about psychology, the more you learn about, being able to connect with other people, and the more you learn about the pagan practices or spiritual practices in general, the better equipped you're going to be to guide any being, especially a child. But one thing that I would have to say is that my family believes that if that child chose you to be born to, it's for a reason, and that you are so incredibly perfect for the job of getting them where they need to go in their path that it's pretty much like falling off a log. You really can't screw it up too badly.
Yeah. Exactly. Emotion
You
regulation
don't get to
is
dictate
huge.
to them what the path is supposed to be, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Emotion regulation is huge. And there's a lot that we can talk about going forward in like how to assist children in attaining emotion regulation skills, even from the time that they're even as young as 18 months, 2 years old. Um,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of talk about there, but we're running over on a second topic, and so 15 minutes
We'll
is
back
a
to it eventually. If
yeah it's
anyone
a
has any questions, please do submit those comments in the comment section down below
yeah
or to the side or wherever it is on whichever platform you happen to be
yeah
peeking in on.
yeah we're on all of them, and so you can chat wherever you want. Um, but we're gonna take just a quick break, and we will be
Mm.
right back with our last topic for the night. Hey, we're back, everyone. Um, Thank you all for sticking around. Um, and for those who are watching the full replay, thank you so much for being here. Um, we're on to our last topic for the night, which is going to be kind of a fun one. It's a bit, I don't know, maybe lighter. Kind of hard to talk about a lot of things in only an hour. But our last topic for the night, we always like to cover something in health, life, and nature on the show. And so a lot going on in the world of science and the planet and nature in general right now. But one of the things that we decided to kind of talk on and broach here a little bit is the concept of just like energy movement through the universe, because it has so much to do with how like pagans and witches interact, which is energy movement, as well as even if you're working on self improvement and manifestation and all that stuff. It's all the movement of energy.
Yeah.
And so, kind of talking about it both from like a pagan sense as well as perhaps a bit more from just what we know about science and how energy moves. Broad topic.
Well,
We'll come back to it a lot.
those two things are definitely connecting things, though, because a lot of the
Yeah.
way that we visualize how we, as pagans, work with energy in the realm of spell work, crystal work, whatever it is work that you're doing, very much mimics the way we scientifically understand waves and beams of light and so on and so forth to move.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly.
Um,
And yeah, like they're definitely interconnected. And it's just interesting to talk about them both from like a spiritual perspective and from hey, what do we see in the universe? What can we observe in the universe through rigorous scientific method? Um,
mm,
there's things that we can know based on our own experience, but what can we actually observe and record and
mhm.
replicate and describe for those who aren't caught up in the know? And how does it reinforce itself? Um,
Yeah.
Energy movement through the universe is a really interesting and complex thing. Um, One thing I most love about it is that it's all just waves. Everything just moves in waves. That's basically how it
It
is.
does.
Like,
Definitely. I've noticed for like, and I don't know about anybody else, a lot of it is just a matter of exploration of your own personal experience. So unless you're trying to teach something as a specific, this was my experience, otherwise it's really just a matter of trying to explain it to yourself, I would think, when it comes to paganism, and in which case you are in the very unique position of deciding what constitutes proof.
mm-hmm.
And so I have lived a very magical life, but the vast majority of what I have experienced is not something that would be easily explainable to other people.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's where like the two things are both like energy movement from a pagan perspective as well as just from a rote scientific perspective are
Yes.
united, but they're very different. Um, because there are things that we know and can experience in our lives that like I've experienced things in my life that would be very difficult to describe in a way that's scientific and replicatable across
Mhm.
a vast experiments.
Yes.
Um, and so how do we actually communicate those things? And that's difficult. Um,
I've never found it to be so personally. As long as you're willing to preface it with, this was my experience, this is what
mhm.
I took from it. The problem occurs when you start speaking in absolutes. It was
Yeah,
never meant to be an absolute because it is experienced different for each person, just as no two people will appreciate the same piece of art for the same reason. Not
yeah,
usually, anyway.
yeah. Life is very experiential, um, but
And so too
trust me,
is magic.
my therapist will tell me tells me repeatedly that this is one of my greatest issues. But I tend to view the world in a very black and white, under very black and white terms. I'm much more gray than I used to be, but I still like to I still believe there are very, if it's experienced and replicatable by a single person, I like if a single person can believe and say they experience the movement of energy and magic, right? Then it should be provable and absolute. Um, like in the sense like absolutely like provable.
Yeah.
Now it's not to say that no the thing that gets me that what I think saves me from this in a little bit is that there are a lot of things that I believe exist that I don't think we can observe yet. So we
Yeah.
just we lack the ability
Yeah.
to observe them, but it doesn't mean they are unobservable.
This is
And
true.
so a lot of times I try to find how can I, if not in a rote scientific method like experiential way, prove something. How can I philosophically and logically prove it?
Mm.
Um, and so one of the ways like energy movement through the universe. It's a really really broad name for this topic. So it's gonna be a little bit broad here and shift away. But
Hmm.
but I believe that the soul is a physical thing. Soul consciousness,
Yes.
whatever name you want to talk to it, is a physical thing. It's definitely not the majoritarian view. Um, but I believe it's an actual physical thing that could be observed. Um, and so I've written multiple philosophical papers discussing how do we show, like how philosophically can the soul and the mind be physical, and how do we be a separate physical thing, and how do we prove that even if we can't technically observe it yet? Um, which is it's a really really interesting thing to do because the soul moves. The soul of the consciousness moves. It travels. It moves through the universe. Um, it's something that I've been able to experience myself. It's something that honestly a lot of anesthesiologists would probably agree. Um, like there's a really interesting article, I think it was in Fox, written by an anesthesiologist talking about how many anesthesiologists would actually view the soul because consciousness they can tell is something separate from the body because it seems to continue. Because the issue with anesthesiology isn't putting someone to sleep; it's waking them back up. And
Yes.
but there's something about the way that you put people to sleep
Lost sleep either.
that seems to like
Distracted.
because the fact is like it seems to be completely separate. The consciousness seems to be completely separate from the mind based on how the human body reacts when
Yes.
when we use anesthesiology, when we use anesthetics, because oftentimes the consciousness will be there before our body has met, before our body is able to communicate what that consciousness is experiencing.
Hmm.
Um, which is like in the fact that we can get blackout drunk, the fact that
Yeah.
all these things are actual evidence that the consciousness is separate from the body because the consciousness starts
It is
driving the
not
body.
required for your personality mainframe to be online or functioning in order to actively and effectively experience this universe at this level of existence. You are
Yeah.
correct.
And so the interesting thing about that is, I said it shows that like consciousness tends to like move in of itself. It tends to just like go
The
somewhere.
interesting thing that I find about that concept too, though, is that intention is a very big deal when it comes to the pagan community. And then you have to ask, it took an awful lot of energy to corporealize yourself on this little backwater planet. So, exactly why? Why did we do it? What was there to be gained? Because nothing is ever done for no reason. There is no evil in expecting something back for effort that you have put forth into something. So we came
Yeah.
here for a reason. Every single one of us, maybe not the same reason, but we definitely came here for a reason. And I find it so highly amusing that there are so very many people who came here for a specific reason and they spend their entire time existing in this plane of existence, trying desperately to escape it.
Yeah. Um,
I
yeah,
don't
that's
understand that.
that's where
But
we might disagree a little bit. Um, which there'll be many moments on the show where Alyssa and I disagree. Um, but for me, I honestly, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of intention in deciding to come here. Um, to me,
that's
just
just the way
because,
I was raised. That's what my
yeah,
people believe. You decided to be here because you cannot be here without your consent.
yeah, and for me, I often question, like, like I said, I view the soul, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, as an actual physical thing. Um,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure that, I'm not so sure that we have that much actual intentional control over what body it inhabits. Um, like, or if it inhabits multiple bodies, like the concept of reincarnation, um, like past lives, future lives. I'm not
I do
even
believe
sold
in
on
that. I've
those.
done past life regression quite
Yeah.
thoroughly. I've more so, not more than everyone, but more than like the average witch.
Mm-hmm.
In that, I have a bit more experience when it comes to that. And one thing that can I just like insert there is like it doesn't really matter if you were someone big in your past life, you're not living that life.
Yeah.
Just put that out there.
Yeah. But like I said, like for me, it boils down to like okay, if we can't actually observe this thing, how do we prove it? Because that's the thing is I live a lot of my life based on what can I at minimum logically show
But
for
but
multiple people.
why do you need to prove it?
That's
And
the way
and
it's the way
prove
I
to who?
choose to travel and
Prove it to who?
experience
If
through
you're
the
proving
world.
it to yourself, well, then the answer is always going to be individual, specifically to yourself. And if you're
Yeah,
trying to prove it to somebody else, why?
because for me, I think like how I navigate and interact with the world is influenced by my personal experience as well as
Mhm.
just the shared experience of humanity. It's the
Hmm.
shared experience and belief of humanity. Much of what we use and much of what we do every day is only available because it was replicatable in a shared
Sorry.
experience
Yeah.
for the world. Like the reason that we can talk this way um, over the internet, using computers and small little phones and all this stuff is because of replicatable, provable concepts that started out on paper in someone's head as something that they believed to be
Yes.
true, that they were able to first logically and then mathematically and then
See, but you're coming
physically.
from this whole concept from the perspective of a scientist,
Yeah.
whereas I would more compare it to the subject of art or music. How do you teach someone to have a passion for art or music? How do you teach them to know the difference between the subtle little swoop or the little tiny flick of that paintbrush? How can you tell them and really get them to understand the differences in these colors and the way that they flow and mix and change and interact? You can't. It's a matter of their own personal experience. You can't give them the muscle memory. You can't,
Which
it's like
is
riding a bike. You can explain it to them 1,000 times and a half, but until they're sitting on the bike and they're actively pedaling it themselves and they have to get used to keeping their balance that way, there's going to be nothing
yeah.
going that way. And just to me, it kind of sounds halfway like you're trying to do all their work for them in order to validate yourself.
No,
You're not
no,
going to get any
it's
extra by doing their homework.
no. Like to me, it's more like there's validation in shared experience. So
Yes,
the fact
but it's
is
validation in a lot of their experiences too, though.
every culture globally, and every human in history, as far as we can tell, has an appreciation for music in some form.
Yes.
Um, so we can't teach it, and it's all individualistic, right? There's a shared
Yes.
experience there. And understanding that
Yes.
shared experience, and we know it to be true because we observe it
But
everywhere,
then we
gives
also Well,
To
it's the
me, it gives a
same.
different
It's the same
understanding.
perspective
It gives a different
because
understanding to me of how we interact with each other.
well, I mean, but it is very similar in the ways of understanding magic and the energy flow there, though, because if you think about it, maybe I'm definitely not the only one who's experienced this, but I don't know about you, but there's definitely a
Hmm.
genre war between music types and writing styles and
Yeah,
all of these things. Oh, I would never listen to that music. And
yeah,
so it's just like, and in a way, that's very much what we're seeing, for example, on TikTok amongst the witchcraft community, that intolerance, that
yeah,
set in their ways, my way is better.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's really,
it's very
yeah.
classist
Like
and
coming back to
ableist.
music on that, much of like there are many um, examples of music. Like for
Yes.
example, like much of the Eastern society and culture doesn't even use the same type of scales that we do. Like
Yeah.
much of Western music and what's a major and minor and what's harmony and discord, all this stuff is actually
Mm.
informed basically from like early like around like 400 500 AD
Yes.
Europe, right? But at the same time, it's because that's how we developed and grew. That's how we experience what's good, and much of what's Eastern would actually sound discordant to us, because like it's not, but it's still music, and to other
It
people it
is
sounds
still music,
perfect.
yes.
But the
And see,
but what I find,
the problem occurs when somebody who loves country music and hates any other type of music tries to dictate to someone who likes
yeah,
K-pop, their music sucks and you need to learn what good music is.
yeah, and see that's
You
the
see
thing, and
where
that's
that
not what I'm
problem
and that's
is.
not what I'm advocating for here. What's more interesting to me is that even though it's so different and we
Yes.
cannot experience things the same way, it's observable. It's an
Yes.
observable, provable thing that this music exists globally and all through
Yes.
history, and so
Well, so
and is
I mean, it's also a
replicatable by
global
anyone.
improvable thing. It's also a global improvable thing that experiences beyond the personal physical form and experiences of a magical type exist in ancient cultures across the globe without exception.
Yeah,
There
and
are
that's where
dark spheres, there are things to represent deities and guardians and guides
yeah,
in every culture in existence. And sure, they may not be exactly the same thing, but is that not in and of itself proof that
yeah,
something is
and
up there?
that's a gigantic logical step forward, like
Yeah.
in a good way. And so what then comes for me is, well, how do we replicate it? Because that's what it starts to get for me
That's a
is how do we begin
big
to replicate?
recipe, though.
Yeah, it's a
That's
giant,
the hard part.
and but that's why I say, like, for me, I experience the world better. Like I feel more connection when like we begin to be able to prove things and replicate them because it enhances everyone's experience or ability to have experiences. Once something becomes easily replicatable, it then
Mm.
advances further beyond that into what we could not then understand and replicate. Every time we reach a new understanding of something to the point where we can essentially democratize it and make it available universally. Not everyone universally does it, but easily
Yes, not
available.
everybody universally is meant to do it. Making it available to have, I would definitely agree with. But we just have to remember that having the option is not the same as having the obligation and make
Yeah,
sure that people don't start making that mistake.
yeah. Well,
Um, because I
exactly.
mean, I've spent my entire life being psychic, and I have proven to quite a few people that I am psychic. I have never done so because they asked me to.
Hmm.
It just kind of happened.
Yeah,
And that's the way my family believes that things should be done. But that also, there are people out there who, even though they do have the ability, because every human being has the sense to do so, it doesn't mean that they're going to use it.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
doesn't
and
mean that
that's
their
why.
path that they're meant to in their path, and it doesn't mean that they're supposed to understand you or even believe that
Yeah.
you're capable.
Well,
It's not your job to prove yourself to the world.
and the thing for me is I'm highly individualistic, and very into the idea of like wide democratization of all skill and knowledge and ability, and that no one should
Mhm.
be forced to do anything, but everyone should have the skills
Obviously,
and knowledge to be able to do so.
they should at
Um,
least have access to somewhere to get the
yeah,
skills and knowledge to be able to do
exactly.
so. That's true.
And so in that, whoop, ah, hold on.
Mhm.
Sorry, I just hit my mouse with my foot, and it like clicked out of Discord. Somehow,
Um,
that was weird. But but then, like I said, beyond that, it comes into this realm of to get to that point, we first have to understand something to the point where we can show it exists logically, then
mm.
physically, and then we can replicate the process. And then even beyond
I
that, then
think
once we do
that
that, people who before might not have been able to understand the process and access it can now access it, and now they can make even further advances on that thing. And that's where I come into the like I have belief in the infinite progress of humanity, and it's difficult to achieve that without the broad democratization of all skills and abilities. And that's why like my favorite things are broadening access to knowledge,
mm,
and the biggest way you do this, you have to first prove it. Once
mm.
you do, then you can go even further.
Now, see, I think you're missing a step in there is the problem because you don't have to prove it. You don't have to
I wholly on my own experience at that point because I know individual experience, even my own, can be incredibly skewed by belief system.
can be, but is not guaranteed to be so. I feel
No,
like a lot of people don't give humans enough credit in regards to that. But I would just like to insert here that, um, at the end of the day, I understand the desire to prove to other people and thus validate for yourself and in yourself that what you see and have experienced is true. But there's a difference between a want and a desire and a need. You don't actually need to prove what you believe or what you see to anyone. What you need to do is practice what you believe and then allow the experience of being around you to be proof enough in and of itself. Teaching ultimately by example is the only real way to teach because if you're teaching by preaching, well, your students missing half the message if they're lucky. Seeing is believing. And in the case of magic, believing is seeing. And so then if you can show them in the way that you present yourself and then allow it to just develop as it will from there, they do most of the rest of the work. You're coming from it from a very academic perspective, and that's great. It definitely has its place in the pagan community. I think a lot more pagans and a lot more spiritualists need to take on a more academic tone in the way that they speak about things. But at the end of the day, it is most definitely always going to be an individual experience. And I'd like to just mention that according to, my belief systems, my family's belief systems, the thing you should be most focused on is how do these experiences.
oh, quick technical difficulty. Be right back.
I'm sorry, my husband is calling me on Facebook. my last point.
Okay, we're back.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Um, so just to continue with my last point, never lose sight of the ultimate goal here, and that is to be your best. Um, and so we should always, no matter what we discover or explore, we should always be exploring it from the mindset of how does this benefit, not necessarily how can I, because sure you might be able to prove it, but if it doesn't benefit, it's really the
Yeah. Um,
anyway.
yeah.
We are
But
definitely over time.
yeah, we definitely are. But this has been a fun conversation. And so I didn't necessarily just want to cut it off. Because it's fun. And I have fun with it. Um, we'll definitely be coming back to this because I think there's a lot of room for discussion and some disagreement here. It's a lot of fun. But we are now at the end of the show. So if there's anyone in chat who hasn't really talked yet, but would like us to kind of group manifest anything for you, take a moment and
Yeah.
type it, if you would.
I'm not sure if we have one for this week.
No, I don't particularly have one. If I were to think of something that I would just like to manifest in the world, it'd be that um, I don't know, maybe Republicans calm the fuck down. Um,
If I were to try and manifest it, I think that I would manifest a stop of the violence in DC at the
yeah,
moment. There's been cuts.
yeah. Well, exactly, right? And so that's what I mean. Just calm the fuck down. Let's calm the fuck down. Um, so let's just take a moment and just manifest some calming energy over the
Musa,
U.S.
Musa.
So we can just take a moment for that. Um, oh God! All right. So that's this week's episode. We will have an episode next week, which will be a lot of fun. We'll be back here at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then, just going to preface this right now, I'll be taking a brief hiatus from the show for a couple of weeks. Just because, I think we're actually going to pre-record the one for the 20th and just go live. But then for a couple weeks after that, I'll be unavailable because I'll be recovering from my third spinal surgery in 12 months. So I'll be incommunicado for a couple of weeks. And the lovely Miss Ravenwood will see to the show in that time frame. And so we'll have more details on that in the coming weeks. Otherwise, just stay with us, stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll talk to all of you soon. Any parting words?
Please remember, do not have anything else to
All right, we are. Whoops.